The technique I'm going to show you today is really great for adding colour to darker coloured cardstock. So the way that we achieve that is we actually start by laying down a whitewash effect using the Stampin' Up white Whisper White craft ink, which is really gives you a really great opaque layer upon which to build your colour. So that is how I have achieved the watercolouring on this card. You can see I didn't even cut that bit out, so that's actually shows you it's the same colour to start with. So to start doing that, we're adding colour, so we're using the Black Stays On ink again to stamp our image, and I've stamped that onto the beautiful new Gorgeous Grape cardstock. Isn't that a beautiful colour? That's one of the new colours that we got this year with the colour revamp. Absolutely love that. And so the first step to our process is we are going to add down the white craft ink. So I'll show you how I did that. I'll be using the Aquapainter today. Now, a couple of tips when you're using an Aquapainter. You definitely need to have a paper towel handy because you don't want your Aquapainter too wet. So I find that I'm constantly brushing the colour off there and continually dabbing. And sometimes if I get a bit much, I need to dab onto here as well. So good old paper towel comes in extremely handy. So I want to dab a little bit of the Whisper White craft ink onto my block. And that's what we're going to use to lay down the opaque layer. So I'm using a slightly wet, but not very wet, Aquapainter. So it's got water in it. We don't want to be squeezing the barrel and letting a lot of that water out, because otherwise you're just going to get a grey, horrible looking mess on your card. So really dry it off on there before, because you can always add more water, but it's really hard to take it off. So I'm going to show you how I would add the water. Didn't even pick up any of the craft ink then, which wasn't much help, was it? Now it goes on, you think, oh my goodness, I've added so much there. But it actually dries much more translucent than it goes on. So at first it just looks like you're not going to be able to see anything, but it does dry lighter than that. So you want to go right close to the edges. And then we'll do the same with this one. Doesn't matter again if you get a bit of variation in how much you're adding on. That will actually just help with the variation when you're laying down the colour. So as you can see, my Aquapainter is only slightly damp. You don't want it to be too damp, otherwise things get very runny. So what I'm doing is just adding on. If you think you need a little bit more, you can just come over and do that over the top. But because we're going to be using similar colours to add the colour, I'm not too worried about that at this stage. So that's how you add the craft ink, and you just go on and cover the entire thing with that. But as all good videographers have, they have one they've prepared earlier. So once I'd applied all of that craft ink, I actually dried that off with a heat gun so that we're ready to go with the fun bit of adding the colours. So you can add the colours in so many different ways. You could use re-inkers, you could use watercolour pencils, you could use the markers, but I'm going to show you how to use your Stampin' ink pads, your classic ink pads, to add that colour. So what that requires is you actually adding a little bit of colour into the inside of the ink pad. To do that, while the ink pads are closed, you press on the top so that you're actually applying the ink onto the back of the ink pad. So this colour is Granny Apple Green, which is the lightest green that we'll be using. So I just come on here and actually over the top of that, you can see that I'm just adding in the colour. Granny Apple Green is a also a new colour this year. It's such a bright, vibrant green. I absolutely love it. And because it's so bright and vibrant, it actually shows up really well with this technique. So you're always going to get a more subtle look with this technique. If you're wanting really vibrant colours, you'll be going to alcohol markers, which I'll show you in a couple of videos. But what we're doing is adding down, first of all, the layer of the granny apple green, and just make sure that runs clear again. Now, if I've added a lot of water to that, I would wipe that out. Because I didn't add very much water, I was just really picking it up with the wet Aquapainter, it's okay to leave. But if you added a lot of water to make a watercolour wash, make sure you use a paper towel to wipe that out so that it doesn't dilute the ink in your ink pad. Aren't they awesome, the new ink pads, how they work? I just love, they're so much more sleek and compact. I just love them. Okay, so I'll pop that one away. Next one is one I haven't replaced with the new version yet, so muscle memory, I have to remember how to do that. So this one is Garden Green. So again, make sure that my Aquapainter is clear, running clear of the other colour, picking up some of the ink in there and adding in my highlights. So I add around the edges, close to where it joins the flowers, and also the tip. It's just a little bit too wet, I'm finding. Isn't it funny how I sit quietly when I'm colouring? There we go. So and then I'm just blending in that colour, needs a little bit more. So and a little bit more down the edge here. So there's a bit of variation in the green on the leaves, as you would see in nature. Okay, let's clean that off, and now we'll start adding some colour to the flower to show you how I've done that. So we'll start with the lightest colour, which is Highland Heather. So I find the new ink pads a little bit harder to transfer the ink, but you can get there. I don't know what that is that's sitting there on my ink pad, but let's get it off. There we go. Okay, so we'll start by adding the Highland Heather. Now I add this to the entire layer so that we're laying down our primary colour or our lightest colour over the top. And again, doesn't matter if you get variations in the colour. I actually think that really adds to the overall effect. Because I was cutting these flowers out too, I didn't worry too much about going over the edges, but I would be much more careful with that if I wasn't cutting them out. Again, we're getting a bit much there. So we'll add some more. So I've added down my Highland Heather, which was my lightest colour. And now I want to come in and add some of the darker. So this is Gorgeous Grape, which is the same colour as the cardstock. It's going to be darker, so we'll be using that for some of the highlights closer to the flower there. Love these colours together, Highland Heather and Gorgeous Grape, really beautiful. They look great with Granny Apple Green as well, Old Olive, Garden Green, all of the greens look really great. So if you're a purple person, you must get onto our new colours. Here we go. So, and then I just continually build up the colour to get the effect that I'm wanting. So you can add more and more colour as you go along, and then add a little bit around to differentiate the petals because you would see a shadow there. And then I'd also be adding a little bit at the top here. So I'll add the colour and then I'll come back in and blend that in a bit better. So I've added my colour and I'll just come back in and I'll just blend that down a little. I think it needs to be a little bit more watery than it is and get rid of some of that colour. Yeah, that's better. And just blending. So it actually blends really nicely over the top of that white craft ink. There you go.